सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
This is the year of G20 in India, and some of the big events have been happening lately. So we had the G20 finance ministers gather in Bengaluru. Now we have the G20 foreign ministers gathered in India. And you know what? Behind all these ceremonials, all these decking up of our cities, flower pots coming up everywhere, behind all this lies hard diplomatic work, and that's where problems lie. We've seen two problems already. In fact, we've seen it's the same problem. We've seen it in Bengaluru, and now it's coming up in Delhi as well, which is when you get these 20 countries together, whether it's their finance minister, their foreign ministers, tomorrow their heads of state or their chief executives, how do you get them to finalize a joint statement? How do you get them to agree on one set of formulations? The fact is, these are sovereign nations, and sovereign nations, like individuals, all have their own interests. Individuals can do groupthink. Individuals can join a party, a cult, maybe a religious organization, a religion, read from a scripture, but nations can't do this. Nations don't do it. Nations have very complex interests, and nations act in their own self-interest. You can't judge them for that. That's why I know that there is a lot of criticism that India, as the chair this year, was not able to get consensus on a joint statement at Bengaluru. And right now, there are fears, suspicions, criticism, presumptions, whatever you want to call it, assumptions, whatever you want to call it, that once again it will be difficult, maybe impossible, or difficult if not impossible, to get a joint statement out of these 20 countries' foreign ministers. I'd say 19 because Japanese foreign minister has not come. His deputy has come, whereby hangs another story. We'll come to that. Now, the reason this is not happening today, the big issue is Ukraine and the war, and what do you call the war. But you know what? These are countries with very complex interests, as I just told you. On some issues, they are together. On some issues, the same people who are together and are in conflict with each other. And in some cases, some people are in one grouping, second grouping, right? But they are in conflict with the third grouping. So these are 20 very diverse, disparate countries. And in fact, looking at them, and as I look forward to the year of G20 in India, I cannot help but remember something that we might have heard when we were teenagers. So if you're my generation, you'd remember Cat Stevens, the singer. The chances are that even if you're much younger, you would know Cat Stevens. Morning is broken like the first morning, etc., etc., etc. He became Brother Yusuf Islam at one point, then came back. A colorful character. He sang in 1971 a song, "Oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon a smile." So this is a wild world, and how wild it is, you figure out by looking at G20. So let me just read the list of the countries in G20 for you. This is Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, UK, US, EU, European Union, and then you have some guests. And these guests are the UN. UN is a guest everywhere, right? UN is like the priest that walks in everywhere and reads a couple of mantras of platitude, doesn't count for anything, but they do land up there. Then there is Spain. There is the ASEAN chair, whichever nation is chairing ASEAN for that year, and a representative of African Union, because otherwise, besides South Africa, there is no other representation in G20. So you look at these 20 countries, and let me try and give you an idea of how diverse these are in terms of their own interests and how conflicting their interests are. So let me divide them into separate groups, basically 3 major groups and then 2 chota groups. So first of all, the group that I might call as my favorite expression, the Chin Pidit Samaj. the Chin Pidit group, or the countries who have grievances with China. This is a large group of 9 countries, right? 9 countries, 9 important countries. Again, Australia, Canada, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, UK, US. I put EU there, but I put a question mark with EU because with EU, you never know which way they are swinging because they sometimes play both sides. But generally, I would say on balance, they will go with America and the Western world. So on balance, I will add them to this group. So this is nine entities: Australia, Canada, India, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, UK, US, EU, Chin Pidit Samaj, or countries or a group of countries with grievances with China. Then a second grouping, and that's an interesting grouping also, that is the Rus Pidit Samaj, or people who are aggrieved with Russia or who have complaints with Russia. They are in the same group. They are going to be sitting in the same halls talking with one another. In fact, it will be the first time since the G20 in July last year at Bali that Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will be in the same room. So organizations like G20 also, while being these big talk shops which struggle to get a joint statement out, also serve a purpose because they bring these people together. That digression apart, I come back. Look at the group of countries who I describe as Rus Pidit, or countries which have a real problem with Russia. That group actually today, in this group of 20, is larger than the Chin Pidit group. So Chin Pidit, or countries with grievances with China, are 9. Countries with grievances with Russia are 11. 11 right now, and you can understand why. You can also figure out the usual suspects: Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, South Korea, Japan, UK, US, EU. And if you look at the list on the screen as I speak of the countries with grievances with Russia, you might have noticed that in my alphabetical count, I missed out one country. That was deliberate. I missed out Turkey. Turkey should have figured after Japan, between Japan and UK. I missed it out because once again, just as with EU on China, sometimes they swing this way or that way, Erdogan's Turkey can swing any which way. It actually is a big weather vane, but weather vane not in terms of how winds are blowing in the rest of the world, in the way that Turkey itself thinks it can make the winds blow. So they will sell Bayraktar drones to Ukraine. At the same time, they have enough leverage with Russia that they can negotiate between Russia and Ukraine, involve the UN to ensure that food grains that Russia and Ukraine both produce in surplus, on which a lot of the countries of the world depend, particularly for wheat and sunflower oil. Pakistan depends on this very heavily, large population country. Most of Africa depends on it. So Turkey also keeps that leverage. So it has, in fact, even more leverage in some ways with Russia than India does. So once again, that's the reason I missed out Turkey in my alphabetical count. But Turkey does belong there because Turkey is effectively a member of NATO, right? And NATO has its own logic on Ukraine and Russia. So 11 countries, once again, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, South Korea, Japan, Turkey. Now, in sequence, UK, EU, and US. These are the countries with issues with Russia. So if you look at these two groups, one, the group with problems with China, problems with Russia. This one is 9, this one is 11. See which ones are common. So there you will find 6 plus 1 are common. I'm not saying 7, I'm saying 6 plus 1 because EU once again has that problem because now you see them on this side, now you see them on that, particularly vis-a-vis China in this case. They have no issue. They are unequivocal in their opposition to Russia. But China, they equivocate. That's the reason I'm saying 6 plus 1. Whereas 2 countries in the first group will not go with the second group. So the 2 countries in the group that have issues with China will not go with the group which has complaints with Russia. And which are these 2 countries? That is India and Indonesia. So this gives you an idea of how difficult these groupings are. And similarly, if you see the second grouping, the Rus Pidit grouping, you will then see countries like, say, France, Germany, Italy, right? They will be very careful. France, Germany, Italy, they'll be very careful when it comes to China. So they will not make common cause, at least in the open. Whatever the whisper behind closed doors, is different. But they will never make common cause with anybody against China. So this is how this world is divided. So this world that G20 represents is deeply, deeply divided along several fault lines, but the two big fault lines today are provided by Russia and China. Now, as we go ahead, we find further complications. Let's create another subgroup or maybe a third group. Like I told you, I'll give you two main groups and a couple of subgroups. So let's look at a third group or a subgroup. Let's call it a subgroup. This is the group that is, I don't want to say Westophobic, but group which is skeptical about the West. It may be an ally of the West in many areas. It may have a lot of common interest with the Western nations, but they also have a lot of suspicion, skepticism, plus they want their own space. So I would say there, China is Westphobic. At the same time, they want to keep America in good humor. They want Europeans to be happy with them, right? Chinese are a global citizen. You may have complaints with them, but Chinese are the second most important global citizen now. They have a very globalized economy. They have huge vested interests in staying with the world. At the same time, they're deeply suspicious of the West because of the troubles they see arising between them and the Americans now. Americans have built Quad or helped build Quad. Canadians, everybody, Europeans, they've all joined in with Americans in their suspicion of China. So the Chinese, I would say, clearly Westophobic. Then Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia in this grouping is a bit like Turkey in the other groupings. Saudi Arabians are allies of America. They depend on America for their security and much else. At the same time, they are suspicious of the West. And third is Turkey. Now that's again very odd because Turkey is always the odd man out, right? So Turkey, member of NATO, a predominantly Asian country which pretends to be European, but at the same time does not plonk itself unequivocally in the Western camp. So these are sort of Westophobic in different degrees. China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Then you have the fourth grouping, which is the friends of Russia. And now things get even more confusing and even more messy because this grouping is China and India who can't stand each other, right? China, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, because these countries will not say anything hostile about Russia. So again, degrees vary. So while none of these countries will say anything hostile or critical about Russia, some will be not as straightforward in backing Russia. The Chinese will be most straightforward and more unequivocal in backing Russia. India will be a couple of steps behind. India will not say anything rude about Russia. It will also not like other people saying rude things about Russia on Indian soil, and India will also struggle. As you saw, India and its chair summary in Bengaluru struggle with coming up with a final document on which everybody could agree because nobody could decide on what to call Ukraine. What is happening in Ukraine? Do you call it a war, as the Western world call it? Do you call it a conflict, as India calls it? China also mostly calls it a conflict, right? Or do you call it a military operation, a military intervention, as the Russians call it, and as Russians would expect their friends to call it? So sometimes it does look like the Chinese are inclined to go with that description as well. So the issue with having a joint declaration is what to call what's happening in Ukraine. Do you call it a war or not? Now, in that situation, friends of Russia, China, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, right? All of these countries will not be happy with anything critical of China coming out here. Then you come with an even smaller grouping. This is our fifth grouping. Again, these are subgroupings. The big groups are the first two. That is the group that is united by their fear of China and the group that's united by their fear of Russia. But these are subgroups. So our next subgroup is friends of China. That's a small subgroup. Russia, South Africa, to a lesser extent, Russia, but still South Africa there, and maybe Turkey. Again, see in how many groupings is Turkey featuring, and that tells you something about how that country positions itself diplomatically and strategically. You can say this is brilliant diplomacy. You can also say it's too clever by half. But the fact is that Turkey pretty much features on every group except one as yet. And that one is the first one, which is the Sino-skeptic group. Friends of China, Russia, South Africa, maybe Turkey. then friends of India. I know I did not make a group like that, but I know that you will ask me. So if we made a group like Friends of India, who will be put there and who will be excluded from it? So 20 country, India would say we are friends with everybody. The fact is that India will not even say publicly, particularly now with G20 is going on, that India is not friends with China. In fact, the fact is that India does not say publicly that India is not friends with China or India has a hostile relationship with China. India walks a very tightrope in all this. And that is what is being criticized, including by Shashi Tharoor, who's been a diplomat himself, that India is writing too tight, the tightest of these tightropes, which does not behove a country of India's size and stature, particularly in a year when India is the chair of G20. Now, this G20 Foreign Ministers Meeting has one shadow over it, which is the absence of the Japanese Foreign Minister. So, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi, he's not been able to come. So, his ostensible reason for not attending is that he has to attend a Japanese Parliamentary Committee meeting on the budget. Japanese Parliament, as you know, is called the Diet. So that is the reason his deputy is coming. But a lot of people think that his not coming is casting a shadow on this Foreign Ministers meeting, because there is also a Quad meeting happening on the side, a Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. Now, will a Quad Foreign Ministers meeting happen without Japanese Foreign Minister? Will a Quad Foreign Ministers meeting happen with the Japanese Deputy Minister? Will everybody accept this explanation that this is because the Foreign Minister is needed at the Diet budget meeting? Or is it something that India will take umbrage at, or the rest of G20 take umbrage at? Is this a signal that this G20 is not reaching anywhere? But I don't think so, because earlier G20s also last year, since the war in Ukraine has been the big elephant in the room, right? Nobody wants to look it in the eye. This shadow has hung over G20. So in fact, even at the last session in Bali in November, that was the last month, the last session of Indonesia's presidency, even that, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had walked out. And once again, a joint statement was not issued. So once again, joint statements not coming up, I don't think are such a problem, particularly when you look at all these complexities and conflicting interests that these nations put together in one grouping. But these powerful sovereign nations essentially bring their own respective national interests to the table, or when they sit on the negotiating table and say nice words to each other and exchange platitudes, they are hard-boiled professionals, diplomats. They only keep their only country's, nation's interests close to their heart. And if you see all of that, that's the reason I gave you these groupings and explanations. If you look at all of that, you can understand that just because you put 20 countries in a grouping, they do not become a cult and they do not do group thing. And to expect that is a very unrealistic expectation.